A smile for the kingdom. Empress Baosi, King Yu of Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty, founded by King Wu of Zhou, Jifar, had been passed on to 10 kings for 340 years. In 782 BC, King Xuan of the Zhou dynasty, Ji Jing died, and his son Jigong Enya assumed the throne as King Yu of the Zhou dynasty. King Yu of Zhou was the emperor for only 11 years before the Western Zhou dynasty fell. King Yu of Zhou had a concubine named Baosi, who was very popular. However, since ancient times in China, people have blamed Baosi for the downfall of the Western Zhou dynasty. Is this true? The history of how King Yu of the Zhou dynasty got Baosi begins at the beginning. One day, a couple fleeing from the Zhou dynasty came to a river, and vaguely saw something floating on the river's surface, with many crows circling above. They took a closer look and saw that what was floating was a straw mat with a sleeping baby lying on it. And a giant bird was holding each corner of the mat and dragging it to the shore with great effort. The couple was moved with compassion, plus they had been married for many years without children. In the face of this little doll floating on the river, thinking, could it be a gift from heaven? So they hurriedly picked up the mat, picked up the baby, and fled in the night's darkness. At dawn, the couple took the baby and left Haojing, the capital of the Zhou dynasty. After begging for food along the way, they finally came to the state of Barg southeast of Baosi County, Shanxi province, where they became slaves of the king of the state of Barg, Baoyan, and their lives were finally stabilized. In ancient times, enslaved people were given the surname of their masters. So this kind couple and their daughter were given the surname of Baosi, and the master named her Baosi. In 782 BC, King Xuan of the Zhou dynasty, who had reigned for 46 years, died, and his son, Jigongni, assumed the throne as King Yu of the Zhou dynasty. When King Yu was the crown prince, he had already married Shenxi, the daughter of the ruler of the state of Shen present-day Nanyang Henan province, and gave birth to a son named Yushu. When King Yu took the throne, Shen was naturally promoted to queen, and Ji Yishu became the crown prince. King Yu's father, King Xuan, was a wise ruler who was very strict with the crown prince. King Yu was no longer under his control when his father died. In his middle age, King Yu of Zhou, Jigongni, began to be a passionate man, and he ordered all the local officials to pay tribute to beautiful women, so that he could spend the night with different beauties every night. The ministers mobilized hundreds of thousands of artisans to rebuild Haojing, making it beautiful. King Yu of Zhou was naturally pleased with his dragon's heart. But the craftsmen who had long been uprooted from their homes and abandoned their families were full of complaints. Soon, there was a vision of the river drying up and the mountain collapsing near Haojing, and the great stars reported to King Yu of Zhou in a panic. Oh no, Mount Chishan has collapsed. And the waters of the Qing River, Luo River, and Wei River, which all originate from Mount Chishan, have all dried up. The people said, heaven is angry with the people. But King Yu of Zhou did not care and said, the drying up of the river and the mountain's collapse is a natural phenomenon, so there is no need to make a big fuss about it. At that time, the king of the state of Berg, Bergium, was on his way to the imperial court, so he advised King Yu of Zhou. The collapse of the mountain is an ominous omen, and the Chishan mountain is the base on which our dynasty was built, so the collapse of the mountain is a warning from heaven. King Yu of Zhou was furious and immediately ordered Baogan to be arrested and imprisoned. When word of this reached the state of Barg, all the people in Barg were very anxious, and the crown prince, Barg Hong, decided to bribe King Yu with a beautiful woman to rescue his father. Before that, the state of Bia had already selected a group of beautiful women to be brought by Bia Jiong to Haojing to offer to King Yu of Zhou, so the second time he ordered to seek beautiful women. It took more than a month to find 9 people who could barely be called beautiful women, and Bia Hong was very anxious in his heart. One day, Berg Hong saw Bergsi passing in front of him and realized that Bergsi had already grown up to be a beautiful woman. As long as she put on some beautiful clothes and trimmed up a bit, she was still a beautiful woman. So he decided to include Bergsi in the list of 10 beauties, and sent a special envoy to Haojing in exchange for King Yu of Zhou's pardon for Bergda's offense. King Yu of Zhou was only resentful that Baigong had spoiled his fun, but he knew that Baigong was loyal to him. And when he heard that Baigong had sent 10 beauties to atone for his sins, He was happy and released Bagong.
In the spring of the third year of King Yu's reign, 779 BN.
See, on a whim, King Yu wandered around the harem. When tired of walking, he sat under a big tree to rest, and a courtesan brought him a cup of wine on a golden plate.
The king took the glass of wine and suddenly saw that the hand holding the plate was so white and tender
that he could not help but raise his head and look at the palace maid.
He looked at this, a good beauty half a day back to God, then asked, "What is your name?"
"How come I have not seen?"
Baosi's cherry lips lightly opened, and the delicate voice replied, "I am the family slave
of the king of the state of praise, named Baosi, last year's tribute to the palace. When I first came here, I worked in the Coon Clothes Bureau, and it was only because of the promotion of the eunuch in charge that I could work in the palace as a handyman at the beginning of this year." King Yu of Zhou sighed that it was too late to meet Baosi, and immediately took the small Baosi into the harem. Baosi thus became a phoenix that flew to the top of the branch.
However, Baosi wanted more. When she was in Baosi, her adoptive parents died 5 years ago, and the people around her either bullied her or flattered her, and no one treated her as a friend. So now, she had no relatives or friends in Haojing and could not live happily. The king of Zhou, Qigong also treats her as a plaything, and her wealth and prosperity do not bring her happiness.
As a result, Baosi was always indifferent and sad.
She seldom spoke and rarely smiled.
After a year or so, Baosi gave birth to a son for King Yu of Zhou and named him Jiboshu.
However, the new motherhood did not bring much joy to Baosi, and she was always sad.
King Yu of Zhou also noticed that Baosi did not like to smile.
When he asked her, she would not tell him. When he asked again, he could only squeeze out a smile, which made him feel even more distressed.
"Is it that they are unhappy because they have no name?"
King Yu Zhou said in his heart. After half a day's thought, King Yu felt this must be the reason.
So he ordered Queen Shen and Crown Prince Yishu to be abolished and set up Baosi as the queen and Boshi as the crown prince.
Seeing that this situation could have been better, Yishu fled the capital at night and did not know where he ended up.
When Biography, a historian of the Zhou dynasty, saw that King Yu of the Zhou dynasty had acted so arbitrarily, he was puzzled.
So he looked up the annals of history to find out the reason. He read a legend in the annals of the Zhou dynasty and learned about the life of Baosi.
He could not help but be greatly shocked and sighed. Baosi is the queen of evils and the demon of the kingdom. Now that she has become the queen of the demons, the Zhou dynasty is sure to die. King Yu of Zhou was still proud of his arrangement, thinking Baosi should be happy now, but he didn't expect Baosi to smile. King Yu of Zhou had already paid a heavy price but failed to get the expected results.
On that day, he had an idea to surprise Baosi, so he immediately asked the men to
light a beacon fire on the beacon platform and beat a big drum to make a loud sound.
The correct name of the beacon platform should be Beacon and Flint Platform.
During the Western Zhou dynasty, the Chinese invented the method of using beacons to transmit military information.
In the military fortresses and roads leading to the fortress areas, there were 5 miles of a flint, 10 miles of a pier,
30 miles of a fortress, and 100 miles of a fortress. There were beacons and flints built on the piers and fortresses of the fortresses, and military officers and soldiers were guarding and managing the fortresses and fortresses. If the enemy was found to be attacking, smoke during the day, fire at night.
With different ways to indicate the number of enemy troops, the beacon flint platform, in turn, passed to the capital. The capital also lit the beacon. To the 4 sides in turn to pass the emergency, so that all the feudal lords immediately sent troops to the capital.
And then after the collection of the rescue and drive the enemy to the border areas.
The lighting of the beacon fire is a signal of war related to the country's survival. Still, King Yu of Zhou, to please Baosi, lit the beacon fire casually when there was no enemy attack, which was an unethical and unruly.
King Yu of Zhou brought Baosi to the wall of the capital city and saw that from near to far.
The smoke from one fortress to another rose straight up to the sky, which was magnificent. Since the beacon smoke was lit, all the lords saw it and wondered what had happened to King Yu of Zhou in Haojing.
And they all hurriedly led their troops and horses to come to rescue him.
When the armies and horses arrived at Haojing, they found nothing had happened. so they had to return home with disappointment and anger. In the distance, armies rushed to the rescue, pushing and shoving each other on the road, creating a mess. Standing on the city wall, Baosi saw the woeful state of the army of the lords and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha ha! Baosi's laughter in the city of Haojing scattered, startled a tree of old crows, Ilya in response.
King Yu of Zhou was happy to see Baosi's rare smile. As soon as he wanted to make Baosi laugh, he asked his men to go to the beacon tower to light it.
However, fewer and fewer lords came to be deceived. Finally, when King Yu of Zhou lit the beacon, no one noticed it.
So Baosi began to mope again. The father-in-law of King Yu of Zhou, Marquis Shen, was a powerful vassal. When King Yu abolished Queen Shen and Prince Yushu for no reason, Marquis Shen held a grudge and sought revenge. In 771 BC, when King Yu knew that Yushu had fled to the state of Shen to please Baosi, he sent someone to bring a letter to Marquis Shen, asking him to put Yushu to death and to bring Yushu's head back to Haojing.
The Marquis of Shen, of course, refused to kill his grandson and wrote a fierce protest to King Yu of Zhou, saying, in the past, King Jie of Xia favored Qi and Miaizai, which led to the end of the Xia dynasty. King Zhou of Shang favored Yu Daji, which led to the end of the Shang dynasty. And now you are favoring the demoness Baosi, abolishing the first line of command and setting up the second line of command,
which is neither husband and wife nor father and son. So I am afraid that you are about to perish too, if you don't change your ways at once. King Yu of Zhou was furious at the letter and wanted to send troops to crush Shen.
The Marquis of Shen got the news and borrowed troops from the Western barbarians and the Indian Rongs with a lot of money and gifts. The Western barbarians and the Indians, who had always been enraged with the Zhou dynasty, gladly agreed to join forces to attack King Yu. When King Yu of Zhou saw the allied army of Shen Hao coming like a tidal wave, he was so scared that he immediately asked his men to light a beacon fire to ask for help from his vassals. However, the trick of crying wolf did not work anymore. When the lords saw the beacon fire, they thought it was another trick of King Yu of Zhou and refused to send troops.
As a result, King Yu of Zhou was defeated by the Shen lords, and he fled for his life with Baosi and Bakufa in bad luck.
At the foot of the mountain, King Yu was killed by the soldiers of the Indian who came after him, and Baosi was captured and sacrificed to the lord of the Indian. After looting all the treasures and beautiful women in Haojing, the Indians and the Western barbarians set fire to Haojing, and the Western Zhou dynasty collapsed. The Marquis then installed Ji Yixu, who was in the state of Shen,
as the son of heaven and assumed the throne in Luoyang, the eastern capital, which was called Eastern Zhou.
What happened to Baosi, who fell into the hands of a barbarian chief? There needs to be a record in the history books.
In Chinese history, there has always been a saying that the red face is a scourge, but Baosi Seed did not have any independent will. She was also a victim of King Yu of Zhou's mediocrity and misuse of the country.